Welcome to the Sports Sesh podcast. I'm your host, Mason Shatwell. I'm joined by my co-host, James Evans. And today, the episode's a bit different to usual. We're joined by, arguably, the voice of BBC Sport, Mr. Guy Mowbray. Cheers for joining us, Guy.
No problem at all. Sorry about the lockdown hair and the background. Trying to feel as if I'm in a crowd. So that's Bootham Crescent, the home of football, behind me.
Today, I just wanted... things we're going to go over is stuff like how your commentating career, your thoughts on this season, and like topical football. But first thing I wanted to ask, while football's not been on, how have you been keeping yourself sane and not going insane?
By playing Football Manager a lot. That's how I started, actually. I used to play it quite avidly, and then I stopped a good few years ago because reality was blurring with real life. And I was thinking that players played for clubs who didn't really, because they only had done that in my game. So I stopped doing that quite a while ago. But it was nice just to chill out for a few weeks and do things like that and catch up with stuff around the house. And then actually I got into a bit of a routine working. With this job, it never ends with prep and stuff for games coming up. Now, although I didn't have games coming up immediately, we were supposed to be having Euro 2020. I was supposed to be in some far-flung corner of Europe right now. So that will be happening next year, hopefully. Fingers crossed, touching wood. So actually, I got quite a lot of the groundwork done for that well in advance. There'll be a lot to fill in. There'll be a lot to update as next season goes on. But sort of 50%, 60% of the work that you have to do, I've kind of got done. So it's a starting point, and it should mean that I'm not quite as rushed when the revision time comes next year. So it's been quite productive, really, and now we're back in action. So much the better. That's terrific now. Well, terrific-ish.
Hi, Guy. I hope you're all right, mate. Obviously, you were talking about how now that we're back and we're playing football, you're on commentary duties last night with Newcastle versus City.
Yeah.
Were you up in the gantry for that one? Were you at St James's Park?
Yeah, we're always at the games. Some of the lucky few who get to go to the stadiums. It's not the same. It's very different. And every ground that I've visited, I've been to Anfield, I've been to Goodison, I've been to the Etihad, and I've been to St James's now. Every ground is different. They all have slightly different protocols. They all have slightly different atmospheres with nobody in. And I found actually Goodison Park was odd because it was a Merseyside derby, so that didn't feel right. Yesterday, the St James's Park experience was very, very odd. And I think it's because the stands, that they tower so much, and it's the stand that we're in, the lower tier of the stand that we're in sort of goes up and on one level, and you can usually see everybody around you. It's one of the ground where you chat to people around you freely, and it's really a good part of the day is that. So it was very strange not having anybody there, and it really did feel cavernous and empty yesterday. So it wasn't the most enjoyable experience, but I'd rather be watching football than not doing it all. So but it's taking a lot of getting used to. You kind of come away from the game and you think, oh, that was horrible. I was terrible. And you sort of think that because you're still trying to find a way to pitch it properly. Listening back wasn't as bad as I feared. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Probably not the best judge.
Well, guys, something I wanted to ask is, while you're commentating with no fans present, do you think the standard of football is different when the fans are there, or do you think the players are still performing to the best of their ability?
I think it's a bit too soon to say because they're only 3-4 games back, all the teams. So they're still finding their own rhythms as well. I mean, it's effectively like if the Premier League season, as is rumoured, sort of kicks off end of August, it'll certainly have to kick off by mid-September at the latest. So there's not going to be much of a break. So in a way, this is the most perfect pre-season for those still not fighting for anything, and plenty are. It's the most perfect pre-season that any teams could have because, they're building up with proper competitive, meaningful games. And they are all getting better for every game. You can see the improvement in every team, every game that they play. The only exceptions to that, I would say, are Manchester City, who have just hit the ground as though they've never been away. And I figure it's because that's how they train. And an empty stadium to them, well, an empty training ground, an empty training stadium, wherever it is they do it, they are used to playing like that. I think the intensity has never been away from them, and they're so good, aren't they? Let's be honest. So they have been terrific, and Liverpool as well. Okay, they weren't so good at Everton on their first game, but then boy, did they hit back against Crystal Palace. That game that I was at last week that they won 4-0. I'm not exaggerating, and this is no disrespect to Palace, who didn't actually do anything wrong. They didn't play that badly. It could have been 10, and it's because they just couldn't get the ball. And the same, I guess you could say, for Newcastle City in the Cup on Sunday. That could have been double figures, couldn't it? Because the other teams just couldn't get the ball from them.
Would you say players are having less pressure on them without the fans there at the moment?
I'm not sure. I think they'd enjoy it more with fans there. I don't think there's any doubt about that. It's the buzz, isn't it? Everybody feeds off the buzz. Everybody does. Fans do themselves. We do as commentators. Officials do. And I've spoken to referees who much prefer having a crowd there, no matter how much abuse they're getting. It's strange for them as well. So players would much rather. But pressure-wise, I think these guys at the top level, they create their own pressure. The pressure is something innate. They just want to perform to the best of their ability. There might be the odd thing with penalties. Maybe we won't see quite so many missed penalties. I think that the crowd certainly can have an effect there and just make things seem a little different. So, the way De Bruyne tucked his away yesterday, having said that, he would have done that with the crowd, let's be honest.
Yeah.
You look at Sheffield United, obviously, before that, they were on some sort of fairy tale run, and we all enjoyed watching Chris Wilder's team. But now that they've been back, they haven't been playing as to how well we usually have watched them this season. Would you think that they would benefit from the crowd? Because obviously at home, it's just like a fortress over there. And, the Sheffield United fans, they're like a community. All the fans get behind them. They're very passionate up in Sheffield. Do you think that they've been one of the teams that have not benefited from the COVID-19?
I'd go along with that, but again, I wouldn't read too much into it because we are only 3-4 games back. So I wouldn't read too much into performances and start to, I've heard big criticism of Leicester City, which is nonsense. They're still third in the Premier League. It's not valid criticism right now. Every team has a little dip in results or has a run where results don't go their way. By all accounts, actually, Sheffield United were way better than Arsenal yesterday, despite losing the game. But the point you've made is valid because if you look at the quarterfinals yesterday, all four favourites, in inverted commas, the four supposed bigger teams, again in inverted commas, won through all away from home. Now, the crowd at Newcastle would have made a difference. The crowds at Leicester, in Sheffield and in Norwich would undoubtedly have made a bit of a difference. I'm not saying that the results would have been different, but I think there would have, particularly in cup ties, I think there would have been that little extra edge coming from the stands.
Well, while we're talking about how the fans benefit the teams, what do you think on some of the lower Premier League teams, the financial effect with having no fans there is going to be on them?
I don't think Premier League teams, because of the way it works with, TV revenue, etc. I don't think many of them will need to worry too much. The ones who are about to go down, and we don't know who it will be yet, it's looking like 3 from 5 at the moment. The ones that go down maybe, although parachute payments again will help. So I don't think Premier League teams financially will have to worry too much. It's lower down the football pyramid that I am concerned about. You can argue that we have sustained far too many full-time professional clubs for the size of the country for far too long. But it is our heritage and tradition. We've always had 92. We now have a whole other division below that. The vast majority, if not all, of the National League are full-time, and a good third of the National League North and South, or certainly a good few clubs in the North and South, are also full-time. I would be very, very surprised if some don't struggle after all this. They'll all struggle, but some may struggle to the ultimate effect. I hope not. I sincerely hope not, and I hope they get help and assistance because they are part of the fabric of our communities. I always think about this question. A few years ago, a guy from Belgium shadowed me one weekend, and he asked me who I supported. When I said York City, and we'd just gone down to the National League North, so the 6th tier of English football, which is the lowest we've ever been in. Shouldn't be in it. We should be at least 2 divisions higher. But there we go. And he was amazed when he said, "Oh, so it's amateur football." I said, "No, professional." He said, "Oh, you're part-time professionals." "No, full-time." And he said, "How many crowds do you get?" Level 6. And he goes, "What crowd do you get?" And I said, 2,500 pretty much every home game. And he couldn't believe it because outside the top division in Belgium, it's pretty much semi-pro and then amateur. There is nothing else. Belgium's as big as we are. but they don't have that history. We had the history from the year dot in this country of communities having their own football clubs. It's why they're football clubs. The word club to me is very, very important. Nobody is the owner. The fans and the community are the owners of the clubs. You have custodians who fund it, and we need them. But nobody is actually the owner apart from the fans and the communities themselves. That they are the ultimate clubs. So that's why they should be sustained and protected as much as possible. It was such a shame when what happened to Bury last year. But no, I don't think Premier League clubs will be in all that much bother immediately. Down the line, possibly. But I do worry at the lower levels of the Football League, and I certainly worry when you get down to National League and National League North and South. There might have to be some sort of restructure in the coming, I won't say months because that's not that dramatic, but maybe in the coming years there might have to be a restructure lower down the level.
How have York City been affected by COVID? Because obviously you're a big York City fan, and
got a shirt on.
What's it like for
them? Well, the club furloughed all the staff and players, and used the government furlough scheme, and the owner and chairman topped up the rest to make sure everybody was still on a full wage. We're in a better position, I guess, than a lot of clubs because we do have an owner who, for all his faults that people are quite keen to highlight, he doesn't go to games for one at the moment, which is unforgivable in my book. But he has funded the club for many, many years and has continued to do that. So long may that be the case, and they can continue to prosper. And I just hope, I presume there has been some sort of effect. I mean, one effect for a start is we campaigned at having finished top of National League North, although Kings Lynn then jumped ahead of us on points per game and have gone up. We were lobbying for playoffs, which hopefully will now win through. God, that's going to be unbearable. That's going to cost an awful lot of money. It's something like £150,000 just to stage the games and to get the testing done of the players, etc., and everybody that needs to be there. So there's obviously an effect. There's obviously going to be a dip in funds. And because they've been waiting around and been on furlough, there's been no staff to do the admin, etc., at the club. So these players actually are technically out of contract. I don't suppose we've got many players at the moment, maybe 7 or 8. I don't know who was on contract to be on the end of this season, but there's all sorts of problems like that with all clubs at that level, and you're kind of relying on loyalty for the playoff campaign ahead, and hopefully the promise that if they do get York up, then they'll be rewarded for it. It's such a complicated situation. It is. We've used this word a lot, haven't we? Unprecedented, but it's so strange. Nobody could have prepared for this in a football world.
Well, while you talked about your team being jumped ahead from Kings Lynn by points per game, do you think with the National League North and South, the usage of points per game was the fair way to decide where everyone finishes? Because I know my local team, Stockport, they had just missed out in playoffs through points per game, but if points per game weren't put in place and it was how the table was, they would have finished in the playoff position.
I don't like it, but I fully accept that there's no real fair way. How on earth do you sort this out? I mean, do you hang on and then try and play when you can play in front of a crowd if you can? But we don't know how long that's going to be. So I understand the difficulties. That would have been the ideal scenario. Hang on, don't bother about finishing the season. Rejig next season into some sort of mini season if necessary. This is what I would have liked in an ideal world. But make sure this season is finished before anything else. I don't like the idea of points per game because, for me, it becomes a computer game. It becomes simulation. You're simulating results in a way. And I don't like that. I don't like that at all. It's not what sport is meant to be. So I'm not comfortable with points per game, but I do fully understand that somebody was going to lose out whichever way it happened, because the fairy tale scenario I've just outlined, which I would have liked, would have been doing nothing other than finish this season when it was safe to do so. But we don't know when that could have been.
Do you think that clubs, from your experience going to games, do you think that clubs are implementing the correct sort of procedures to make sure that everything's smoothly run?
From where I've been so far, I don't think the football clubs in the Premier League and the FA with the FA Cup, I don't think they could have done any more. And the same goes for the broadcasters as well. Every single check that could be in place is being put in place. I filled in so many forms and questionnaires before every single game. You're doing it in triplicate. The club sends you 2 or 3. The broadcaster sends you one. Your employer, whoever you may be working for that game, will send you one. You then got a Premier League tick sheet. You've got to do them on the day of the game, if it's close to the entry to the ground as possible, to make sure nothing's changed. Temperature checks, 2 or 3 every match that you go to. 2 or 3 entrance points where you get your temperature checked all the way. So they couldn't have done any more. There's sanitisation stations everywhere. You must wear your mask. Obviously, you can't commentate in your mask, but when you're wandering around the stadium until you get to your seat, you've got to have your mask on. I don't think they could have done any more. I think every precaution's been taken. So I feel absolutely perfectly comfortable with it, and we'll hope to carry on going through to games all the way through to the end of the season. I just hope that everybody else is sensible outside, and we kind of just persevere with it. It's been awful, but I just hope everybody perseveres with it for that little bit longer, and just never mind guidelines, just use your own common sense. Don't get too near, don't do this, that and the other. Just use common sense and try and get this thing down to virtually nil, and then next season we can start having crowds back in some shape or form, and then hopefully as soon as possible we start having full stadiums again.
With regards to the Premier League this season, obviously Liverpool have just ran away with it from start to finish. How would you assess their season so far?
Virtually faultless, virtually perfect. Nobody's going to have the perfect season, but it's just been tremendous. They carried on from last season with a relentlessness. You could see it would have been a record point season only to be beaten. How on earth does that happen? Because City were they better? Well, yeah, I guess they were. They won the league, but just that tiny notch better. And you could see that Liverpool have come out all guns, and this always seemed likely to be their time from very early on in the season. And City got off to not a slow start, but a slow start compared to Liverpool, and that was it. From the moment that they first met in the autumn, there was never going to be. They've just run away, so there was never going to be anything different. They've been terrific. They've played the best football. They have had the best team and best squad. City have had a few injuries. Laporte was the main one, but they have plenty of cover. But maybe they always say, don't they, it's harder to retain the title. Well, they've done that once. 3 in a row was always going to be very, very tricky. Yeah, the right team's won it. Nobody can argue with that. I'm just looking forward to Thursday night because Jurgen Klopp called it actually before they'd even won the league. He called it after the Palace game last week. This will be the best game ever seen behind closed doors. And I hope he's right. And I just think they've won the league, but they will want to really put a marker down, underline it, rubber stamp it. Right, we've beaten City again. That's what they'll want to do and really run away. And for City's point of view, well, this is a great chance for them to say, we're still here, we're going to win everything else, we're just as good as you. It's absolutely mouthwatering. I just wish everybody will be able to see it in some way, hopefully. Match of the day Thursday night for a start. But I just wish people were allowed inside the stadium. They're both on such good form since they came back that I think it could be an absolutely epic match. And I know that Guardiola and Klopp will be looking forward to it as well, because there's nothing better than pitting your wits against the best around, and those two are the best around. Are
we able to get a prediction off you for that game?
No. Because that's the joy of it. We don't know what's going to happen. I'm doing all right in a predictions league I'm in that's got about 1,600 people in it. I'm actually in the top 40 at the moment as we near the end. So I'm doing all right, but I don't generally publicly air predictions because we don't know. And the minute you do, somebody will come back 10 weeks later and say, in fact, I've had somebody sending me messages on Twitter since the Community Shield when City beat Liverpool on penalties. And from what I saw in that game, I thought, you know what, City are going to have the edge again this season. I think they'll be 5 or 6 points clear of Liverpool by the end. Now, because Liverpool started better then in the league season proper, this guy's been on to me constantly. Well, how's your prediction now? Oh, yeah, City going to run away with it, are they? And I thought, this is just pathetic. None of us know. That's the joy of it. If we knew what was going to happen, it would be the dullest sport ever.
Just from a sort of fan's perspective, I'm a Chelsea fan, but when watching Liverpool and City this season, well, particularly Liverpool, you can't take away what they've achieved. But with City, do you think that the loss of Vincent Kompany is not sort of going to get them in the way? Because I feel like they didn't replace him, and they had to go from obviously playing Laporte, who was injured at the start of the year, who had his injuries, and they had to drop Fernandinho at centre back, which personally I don't think City benefited at all. He's mid-30s. I don't think that's his best position.
Well,
do you think that the lack of signings in terms of defence has sort of gone against Pep Guardiola this season and cost them?
I think in hindsight, you could say they were probably a really top quality central defender light as the season's gone on, but you couldn't legislate for the injury to Laporte, who is that precious thing as well, a left-sided central defender. They really are gold dust. So he would have taken some replacing anyway. I'm not sure about the company thing. His influence on the club is massive, but as you've just mentioned with Fernandinho, age was a factor. The latter half of last season, he was enormous. He was instrumental, a huge figure, as he has been throughout his time at the Etihad. But for the early part of last season and a couple of seasons before, he missed a heck of a lot of games through injury. So it was always going to happen. The departure was going to happen at some point. Laporte, Otamendi, Stones. Stones should have been, and he's had so many injuries, he should have been there as the automatic first choice club and country number one on the team sheet at centre back, the way his career chart was going. He's just not kicked on, probably due to a lot of thigh and hamstring and back injuries and stuff. He's just not quite kicked on to that next level. So Laporte out, Stones out, Eric Garcia not quite ready yet. He might be next season. He might be the player to watch. And then you've got, Otamendi's always had the jury out on him. I rarely see him have a stinker, although he seems to make one mistake every game. But I don't think he's as bad as people make out. And Fernandinho actually has probably been the best central defender at City. So it might be where his future lies in the next couple of years now that he's 34. I think he's 34 now. He might just be the best there for them. So I don't think it's a problem playing him there. No, they didn't replace Kompany as such. But if everything had been right and Stones hadn't been so injury riddled and Laporte hadn't got such a horrible injury, I don't think we'd have been talking about it as quite so much of a problem, really. It's just one of those things. You can't win it every time. Somebody else will come along and, as Sir Alex Ferguson used to like saying, knock you off your perch.
While we're talking about replacing players, something me and James were talking about, I think it was last week, as we know, this is going to be David Silva's last season at the Etihad. Do you believe Phil Foden's going to be the next successor to David Silva's position?
Yeah, absolutely. And Guardiola said it himself. He just gets better every time you see him. The highlight yesterday for me, actually, of the game, which, let's be honest, was such a one-sided affair that there wasn't a lot to take away from it. The highlight for me was, I think it was the build-up to the second goal. It was the second goal, raking ball forward, and it was Foden's control, first touch, before passing to Sterling, and Sterling did the rest. Sterling did brilliantly, but it was the first touch from Foden. He just makes the game look easy. And something he said after they brushed Burnley side 5-0 when he scored twice at the start of last week. And in the post-match interview, this kid's only just 20, only just turned 20. And I know what it's like when you're in front of the camera, even when you're asking the questions. It's quite intense. And you've got one shot, you've got a microphone in your hand or in front of you, and it's quite a hard thing to master, to be comfortable with. And he was asked the question about David Silva, and he straight away, without blinking, he just said, I wish they'd give him another contract. I wish he'd stay. He's still wanting to learn from the best.
Yeah.
And that, I thought, is just so refreshing. It wasn't, I'll take my chance when it comes, or something bland. It was instant. He didn't need prompting by the press officer. It was, I wish he'd stay. I just like watching him. I like playing with him. Yeah, and that tells you he's got a mature head. He is. I mean, how do you replace Merlin, as they call him at Man City, the magician? How do you do that? Big shoes to fill. He's not the new David Silva. He's just Phil Foden, and hopefully he'll be a regular for England for years to come. I think I put a tweet out last week. It's not exactly a bold prediction, this. I think most people would agree with it. But the cancellation of Euro 2020 actually means we might well see him at that tournament in a year's time for the senior team.
Well, I think it was 2 seasons ago when he made his debut for City. You can see his improvement from playing with the players such as David Silva, Kevin De Bruyne, and Sergio Aguero.
How could you not improve?
You can see the vast improvement that he's made in such a short time. And as you say, I do believe as well next season he will be a regular for Man City, and hopefully this time next year when we're at Euro 2021 now, he'll be in the England lineup.
Fingers crossed, as long as he's ready for it, as long as he's free from injury. And there are a few. I mean, I just was thinking yesterday about right back, and I thought, how many years did England sort of, full backs, he sort of looked at it and I wonder how if we've got the right players at fullback, and yet now you've got Trent Alexander-Arnold, and then Reece James at Chelsea is hot on his heels, and he's not the only one. There are players coming through all over. There seems to be a pathway for England now, but don't get me started on England, because I've had this my entire life. You guys are a lot younger than me. You're going to have it your entire lives as well. As soon as we start building it all up and getting excited, it'll all go wrong. It's the way it works. But don't stop building it up, because that's the only bit that we actually get to enjoy. So we should always build it up. We should always get excited. We just got to always take it on the chin every couple of years.
Just a sort of brief one here. My dad's like that as well. He always says that about England. You look at the sort of youth setup they've got in terms of the likes of Jadon Sancho, Phil Foden. I mean, we're just so blessed with youngsters right now. How would you assess Gareth Southgate's chances next year? Do you reckon we could go far? Because bear this in mind, next year, if we do qualify through the group stage, we've got to face either Germany, France, or Portugal.
Yeah, I had noticed that. I've been plotting the path, but why not? No, I think we'll be up there. Other teams won't want to face England. I know that much.
100%.
I think the Dutch are coming strong again as well. They will be a force to be reckoned with. But we'll certainly be up there. We'll certainly be up there. Hopefully, it'll be a tournament to remember. And I've been keeping myself cheerful throughout all this, while I've been upset about missing stuff and no football on and no sport and what have you. Think about next year. Next summer, there's European Championships. And the year after, we get a World Cup. OK, late in the year, but it'll feel like the natural gap. So we don't have to wait quite as long for that World Cup in a way. So, there's nothing I love better than the summer tournaments, particularly World Cups, but the Euros will do. I'm so lucky to cover the Premier League and the FA Cup and the Champions League and Europa League. That's great. I absolutely adore my job. I'm very lucky to do it. But every 2 years, the tournaments, the international tournaments, they are the icing on the cake. And I was desperately disappointed when it went this summer, but we've got something next summer that I possibly would have had a void summer.
And obviously a trip across Europe, and the year after a trip to Qatar. That's not too bad. Well, fingers crossed. That's not too bad for you, isn't it?
It's great. The trips are great. I've been fortunate to go Brazil, South Africa, Russia, Ukraine and Poland in 2012, Austria and Switzerland in 2008. Started France 98 was my first tournament. I've not missed one since. Japan in 2002. So I've been to places I would never otherwise have got to. And I know my way around the world by football. I think a lot of kids do. I would always encourage that, by the way. In any kids, if you've got a kid who doesn't know where places are, I automatically assume, you're not a sports fan then, in particular, you're not a football fan. Because as soon as you start following football, you know where cities are, you know where places are, you know the capitals, you know your way around the world, and it's invaluable. I still know my way around Britain by football clubs, by maps I used to have, and shoot league ladders, which they don't do anymore. They should. They were excellent.
I've got a question from a friend, and he wanted me to ask you, well, while we're on the subject of you saying that you love travelling to the European and the World Cup games, is there a certain game that's in your mind that's your favourite that you've commentated on before?
Oh, so many. There are just so many. I'm rubbish at recall. Something will randomly come in my brain, I'll remember. The tournaments are a little bit easier. When you're covering like 100 odd games a season, sort of the other ones, you're on to the next one as soon as you've done one. So it has to be an absolute belter for it to stick out in your mind. But and the older you get as well, the further back you go to remember them. The older ones you seem to remember. But World Cups, 2 years ago in Russia, the France-Argentina game was extra special in Kazan. I absolutely adored that. And it was only when I watched it back through the World Cup Rewind series that we've done during lockdown, looking back at things, and I got to look back at it all. And I watched the whole 90 minutes again. I'd never do that with games I've seen, but I absolutely loved it. And I think you could actually hear it in my voice, which is quite nice. Really did adore doing that game. That was the best of that tournament. Oh, I could go back through them all. 2014 in Brazil, was it the quarterfinal or the last 16? Brazil against Chile. Brazil won on penalties. What a game that was in Belo. Got to get we say Belo Horizonte because it's anglicised, it's easier, but I was told it was Belo Horizonte. So that's how you meant to say it, but you sound a bit weird when you say it like that, unless you're speaking fluent Portuguese. But that was a cracking game. 2010, there weren't too many cracking games, but I adored South Africa. I loved the experience. my stand-up memory of that is the 4-1 against Germany, unfortunately, and the ball that was feet over the line.
Don't
which
remind me.
Could have made it a different game. It wasn't a classic tournament in terms of football. Again, one of my stand-up memories of that one would be the Uruguay-Netherlands match, which I actually wasn't covering, but I watched it in a little coffee shop stroke restaurant down the road from our hotel in Durban, and just remember getting really excited and into the game. There's just so many memories. 2006 in Germany. I've been all over. I've been very, very lucky, and I've seen some cracking games, and they gradually come back to you. Facebook's good for that, because something will just suddenly come up and it'll say, on this day 5 years ago, and you go, blimey, was I there?
Yeah.
And that's quite nice, and a load of photos will come up. So I know, for example, I was reminded today that 2 years ago today I was in Kaliningrad. I believe it was England-Belgium, the final group game at the World Cup that England lost, and then it actually didn't prove a bad pathway through, did it? But so I remember I was in Kaliningrad watching Brazil the night before in a pub called the London Pub in Kaliningrad with Chris Waddle, and things like that tend to stick in your memory.
Obviously, you've commentated on so many games across your glittering commentary career. Am I right in saying you were the youngest commentator to commentate at a World Cup final in France '98?
Who knows? It says so on Wikipedia, apparently. Who knows? Who's asked every network that's ever covered the World Cup for the age of their commentators? Somebody just went with that and decided to put it on there. So I've got no idea. No, I know I was 26 and it was a real honour in 1998. It was most unexpected as well. And I've been very lucky to have done 3 more World Cup finals for the BBC since. So I'm hopefully, fingers crossed, I managed to not do anything wrong and do a few more. But there are plenty of other people who are just as good who could do them just as well. So you've just got to make sure you do everything right in the meantime. But no, I don't know. Was I? No, somebody else had done it younger.
Can you tell us what the experience was like commentating on the World Cup final for the first time at the age of 26?
Amazing, fantastic, excited beyond belief. I'd only been working in television for just over a year when I'd been working I worked for Metro Radio in the Northeast, and while I was doing that, it was actually in the process of applying for that job. My other job was coming to an end and what have you, and somebody recommended me to Metro, so they wanted to speak to me about becoming sports editor. But in the meantime, I was sending out loads of letters elsewhere, and they kind of happened together. I got offered the Metro job at the same time that Eurosport got in touch and said, would you like to do a little bit for us? So for a couple of years, I was actually doing both jobs together, which was very, very good. It was intense, but at 25, 26, you can handle it. It's quite easy, really. It's sort of, I'd do a Sunderland game on the Saturday, then fly off on Sunday or Monday to Paris for 3 days, do some 3 or 4 programs or live games for Eurosport, and then come back on the Wednesday, Thursday, back to the Northeast, produce the programs for the weekend, do another Sunderland game, and sort of try and bounce between the two things. And it was great fun. So it was quite a shock when I got the call saying, here's your rota for the World Cup, you'll be doing this on this date. And then they said, and on 12th July, you'll be doing the final at Stade de France. And I sort of said, what? Sorry? I genuinely thought it was a mistake. And I checked it once I got over to France for the tournament. They said, no, you're here for the duration. You'll be doing the final. And I was, wow. I've only been doing it for a year. So I'm always indebted to Simon Reed, who was the head of commentary at Eurosport. And you might have heard him on tennis over the years on BBC. Great commentator, a fantastic man, and I'm really indebted to him for giving me my shot at television. And that's how it started. I just the big memory of the final was I was with Trevor Stephen, the ex Everton and Rangers and Marseille brilliant winger, Burnley as well, and England. And myself and Trevor were both like giddy schoolboys. Trevor was quite new to co-commentating. That was his first tournament actually. And we'd been together quite a lot throughout the tournament, had a lot of wonderful experiences. USA-Iran in Lyon was a real good game to remember. We stayed up all night after that game, talking football with an Iranian chap and his son, and a guy from America who was a big soccer fan. And we stayed up late into the night. We were drinking beer. The Iranian guy was on apple tea, and we were just talking football all night. And it was 6 o'clock in the morning before we knew it. And I said to Trevor, we've got to go. We've got a flight to catch. We hadn't even been to bed. It was wonderful. Things like that. The World Cup's great for that, bringing people together. So we got to the final, and then the big drama happened with, you won't remember this, you won't be live probably, Edmundo and Ronaldo.
Ronaldo, yeah.
Ronaldo was obviously not right, and the first team sheet we got, I've got it somewhere. I can't remember where it is, but I've got it somewhere in the house. I've got the team sheet with Edmundo on it instead of Ronaldo, the first one that was handed to us. So then the big shock, and he's playing, and we actually had Pele sitting behind us, directly behind us. He was commentating for Brazilian TV. So I just said to Trevor, what do we do? What do we do? And he said, ask him. So I sort of tentatively said, excuse me, Mr. Pele, because what do you call him? I said, Ronaldo, he plays? And he just sort of gave a thumbs up and he said, yes, he plays. So that was it. I was convinced from that moment on. There's lots of conspiracy theories as to why he played, but I was convinced that Pele basically ordered it. And he's the king of Brazil, so he can do what he wants. And if say he played, he didn't really play. He sort of wandered about for an hour, got taken off. But yeah, that was amazing. And that night on the Arc de Triomphe, down the Champs-Élysées when France won it, that was another night when I didn't go to bed. That was fantastic. That's probably still my greatest experience because it was the first taste of a major tournament, and to be in Paris on the night they won the World Cup, beating Brazil in the final, and you're there commentating on it. I think I thought it was going to be like that every year from then on. Not quite like that.
No, I've got a bit of a soft spot for that French side of '98. I mean, they had
the shirt,
talent right from it's the shirt with Zidane. His iconic celebration for the first goal against Brazil, I think that was their first World Cup, and to do it on home soil as well. I mean, it doesn't get much better. And obviously, you were there. What was the experience like at the Stade de France from minute one to the end of the game and the celebrations afterwards?
Absolutely incredible. Well, we're going back 22 years now, and it was just incredible. I was there incredibly early for the game. Always I'm for World Cup games anyway, but for the final, getting in and just being in your seat, just feeling the buzz. And you kind of, even at that young age, I kind of felt ready for it because I'd done loads of other games in the tournament. So you'd done all the big, they'd all been full. The quarterfinal and what have you. The semi-final, actually, France-Croatia. For some reason, I did off tube. I did in the studio in Paris, that one. Didn't actually go to the game for that one. I think it was a logistical thing with travel. So that was kind of a one-off. But everywhere else, at the games, and maybe we didn't have it live. We might not have had the live rights. I'm not sure. But anyway, I did it live. Obviously, I do the commentary live. But yeah, for the final, we're there, and it was just awesome. And the afterwards was the better bit. I had to wait in the stadium for 2-3 hours just to get away because you couldn't get anywhere. And finally, you sort of scramble onto a metro and get into the centre of Paris. And there were no thoughts of going back to the hotel. We just thought we've got to get in the middle. Just got to get in the middle and experience this. And then, 6-7 in the morning, I went back to the hotel just to get my stuff to then go again to the airport and come home after 6-7 weeks away. But it was, absolutely fabulous. And to this day, my all-time favourite footballer is Zinedine Zidane because he gave me some of my best moments as a young commentator. Yes, I've seen them all, obviously, and Ronaldo and Messi are peerless. Messi's probably the greatest player ever, but it will always be Zidane for me because he did things that I'd only ever seen on a console game before. Some of the pirouettes and turns he did, it's like X, Y, R2, L2 all at once. It's incredible skill, quite a big unit as well. He wasn't a slight figure. If you've ever seen the film, the Zidane film, which is just purely watching him during a Real Madrid game, it's proper art. Is that? It's a beautiful thing to watch. Heck of a player, and I think he'll always be my all-time favourite.
You've been with the BBC now since 2004 at the top of my head, I think. Yeah. Obviously, before that, you had John Motson, and since then, I think he retired 2010 or something like that in terms of international duty. And then you took over then, didn't you, from Euro 2008?
2010 World Cup. I think it was the 2010 League Cup final, I think, it was the first final we'd had on the BBC for quite a while. And we had the rights to that, so I did that one, and then was very fortunate to get the call to do the 2010 World Cup final and World Cup and England games, and it just happened really. It wasn't an interview process or anything. It was just one of those things you get, a bit like '98 with Eurosport. You got the phone call saying, right, we're going to go with you. Thank you very much, and not really had a conversation about it since. I'll soon know about it when I'm not good enough anymore, or when somebody deems that I'm not. It's all it's a funny one because one man's commentator is another man's poison. It's all subjective, and somebody could come in next week as head of sport and say, I actually prefer them. You couldn't complain really, because that's just the way it is. You just got to enjoy the games that you do, no matter what they are, and just do them to the best of your ability. And the main thing is just enjoy football. So that's what I'll keep on doing.
Well, with you being at the BBC for quite a while now, I had someone that wanted me to ask you, what's been your favourite moment while been working with the BBC?
The World Cups, always the World Cups. South Africa, Brazil, Russia. Brazil for the Confederations Cup in 2013 was also good. We were out there the year before the World Cup, and that was a wonderful experience. The 2007 Women's World Cup in China will always stay with me. That was a brilliant tournament, absolutely fantastic. And it's only in the last sort of 3-4 years that the rest of the media have kind of kicked on and realised, hang on a minute, England are good at this, and this game's good. But I'm telling you, 2007 was as good as it could have been back then, and we were getting huge figures for England USA at that tournament back then that wasn't really talked about. They bumped one to BBC One, I think, on a Saturday lunchtime at one stage in September, because it was going down so well on BBC Three and the other channels it was on. And that was a great tournament because it was just that little bit understated back here, so no pressure, but it wasn't in China. It was a big deal over there. Full stadiums, great atmosphere, and that was a real highlight as well. Loved that. The Olympics 2012, being part of that, covering the men's and women's tournaments, going around the country, that was a good experience. And it's every week. It's the being at the Premier League grounds every week. So many good games. This is why I struggle to remember all the moments, because you see so many good games. You see a few average ones as well, but they all roll into one. I'm doing, for the BBC alone, sort of 70, 80 games a season, and then others for other people as well. So they all blur into one. I suppose the moment I've got to really pick out Premier League wise would have to be Sergio Aguero. That goal, which nobody remembers me for at all, because it was live on Sky and Martin Tyler did his wonderful commentary. So we virtually said the same things. And the same Aguero, his might have gone on for a second longer than mine. I'm not sure. I watched that back actually as part of our Rewind series recently, and it only became apparent to me how strained my voice was during not just the goal call at the end, but at the end of a season, a long season, how strained my voice was throughout the game. And I was thinking, God, I must have been tired out. I must have been working hard that season. Then a friend of mine pointed out, where were you the day before that game? I said, when was I the day before that game? I can't remember. He said, you were at Wembley watching York beat Newport in the FA Trophy final, and you were singing your head off. And I was. And that's probably why I sounded a little bit hoarse all the way through the most important game in Manchester City's history, which I do apologise for. I probably wasn't on top of my game that day, and I should have been. But there we go. I should point out as well, I was back at Wembley the following weekend watching York beat Luton to get back into the Football League after 8 years away. And now here we are, further away than we've ever been from being back in the Football League.
I'm glad you mentioned the City game, because a friend of mine commented on our page. He wanted to know, obviously, during the build-up to the game and during the game, from your perspective, what was it like as the game unfolded?
Well, I know a lot of Man City fans, a hell of a lot. And I know their history. I know what they're like. And when they went 2-1 down, it was almost this sort of sick humour around the place. I remember looking to my right at some fans that always sit in the place near the commentary seats, and sort of some of them were sort of half smiling and going, well, this is just typical. And one of my abiding memories is when Dzeko made it 2-2. Don't forget, that was 2 minutes. Was it 2 minutes into injury time, or the first minute of injury time? When he made it 2-2, again, you sort of, hang on a minute. And my floor manager, like called Matt Wayne, who's brilliant at what he does, and Matt goes around, he does all the tournaments with me. He's my best travelling companion and a great producer. And Matt went, it's going to happen. We're going to be at the place where it happens. And we knew by this stage that Man United had won at Sunderland, by the way. So we knew it had to happen. And he's going, it's going to happen. I went, no, they need another one. I said, ask anyone here. That is typical of City. People have given up, and then they'll just make it that bit worse by getting that bit closer. And then, of course, everybody knows what happened next. And it's not my favourite goal call. I think I could have done it better. But you just go with what comes out. You don't have a script. You just go with what comes out of your head. And I just went absolutely ballistic. And Martin Tyler did exactly the same as me, a few feet away to my left. The laugh about it is, I say laugh, I'm in a good mood, so I can say laugh. Usually it makes me very angry. There's still a percentage of people in this country who presumably think the earth is flat as well, who believe we do the commentary afterwards for Match of the Day, and we just do the 10 minutes that you see, and we do record it afterwards back at the studio. Well, you see us at the ground all the time. We're always at the grounds. We do the full commentary live, and it's edited down. We're not actors. We couldn't do it that way. It's not possible to do it that way. They wouldn't have the time or the resources to do it that way. And you can tell when a goal has been put on afterwards every single time. You can tell. You could play me 10 now, 5 live, 5 not done live, and I would be able to pick them out every single time, because we're not actors. You just do the job, and that'd be fraud anyway. It just wouldn't be right. It's not done like that. So please get that out of your heads if anybody's thinking that. So it's all. And what would be the point anyway? Like yesterday, Newcastle Man City, I wouldn't be able to do live games if that's all I did. It's not possible. So no, and me and Martin, it's just the way it goes. We virtually did the same call, but still people say that wasn't you, that was Martin Tyler, and I have to try and say, well, it was. But you just copied it. Well, how could I? I'm sitting next to him. We're doing it at the same time. It's just ridiculous.
Well, as a United fan, it's always hard seeing that goal, but I imagine with yourself being there at that present moment, if I was from a neutral point of view, I would have loved to have been at that match just for the atmosphere. I bet while being there, that's a game that's got to stick in your mind for sure. Yeah,
it's the expression on people's faces afterwards when you watch it back now. The joy came later. It's the pure shock. It's the shock and the rubbing your eyes and did this actually happen? And you still look back to it and think, did that happen? Did that happen? Because so many times the big occasions are a bit of a damp squib. It doesn't happen like that. So when it does, you've just got to savour every moment. You really have. It's. I do remember we've got a lot of United fans that drink in my local pub, so I made sure on my way out of the ground, I bought. Those sellers always pop up. Don't know how they manage it, but they have T-shirts printed immediately at full time. And by the time I'd left the ground and all the interviews had been done, it's like an hour and a half after full time. So the fella was there and he still had a load and everybody's gone. So he's basically getting rid of them for a couple of quid. So I said, give us one of them for £2. I made sure I wore it down the pub that night just to really wind up the United fans. And it worked.
Would you, with games like that, with the big Premier League games and the big World Cup games, the big Euro games, would you say preparation is vital before a match day, before you commentate?
Yeah, it's everything. You might not use 90% of it, but you won't. If it's a good game, you won't. But you need it there, and just the process of doing it gets the game in your head. It means you are prepared for any eventuality. You know everything about every player that might possibly be involved and those who aren't involved for whatever reason. You know the history of the fixture, the permutations, the form, everything that you need to know. And just in doing that, it gets you ready for the game and it makes you confident in your delivery. And it is absolutely everything. If you don't do any preparation, somebody I used to work with actually said he wanted me to do this, this, and this, and this for other programs of the BBC. I said, well, I can't because I'll be prepping for the game. And he went, oh, you lot hide behind that. You do far too much of that. You don't need to. And he said, I bet I couldn't tell if you did a game without prep. And I said, no, you wouldn't for the first week because it's all in here. For the first week, you wouldn't. But the next week, you might. And certainly the week after, you would. You know, you've got it. I often refer to commentary preparation as like painting the fourth bridge. You know, that famously, you know, it's a never-ending job. As soon as they finish one end, they're going back and doing the other end, and it never actually ends. And it's exactly the same. You are never finished preparing for a game. You will always get to the game having worked all week, and there'll be something you've missed every single time that you can just add on. There's never any end to the process, but well, there is full-time whistle basically. That's the end to the process. But no, there's always something you can do. So, and this is why I've been doing the groundwork for the Euros next year, because there's a lot of games to cram into a short space of time. Players that I won't see as often as well. So some of it's new. But it's great. It's like revising for an exam every single time you do a game. That's your exam and you've done your revision. If you haven't done your revision, you're going to cock it up. Simple as that.
How long of your spare time would you say you spend preparing for a match?
Pretty much constant. That's why Football Manager's gone now. It's pretty much constant. If I'm not on the golf course, which I'm trying to do at the moment as much as possible, or playing cricket, which I do in the summer, but not this year, obviously, sadly. If I'm not doing that, they're the things I'm prepping for a game. That's what I do at home. I don't really watch TV. I'm not into box sets or anything like that. So I'll be watching football, playing cricket, playing golf, or prepping for football matches, commentaries to come. It's as soon as we finish this, I'll get my head down, see a little bit of Burnley Palace, and do some stats and notes and keep up to date with things. But it's not. I say sometimes when you feel down, and you do with any job, it gets to a stage where you feel, I'm a bit fed up with this at the moment. It usually hits you in sort of February in a season, which is why the start of lockdown was okay for me, because I was probably ready for a break without knowing it. But you hit these lulls. November, if you've been at it hard, it's a bit, you do hit these lulls. But where was I? You do it because you want to do it. It doesn't feel like work. I feel like I'm working hard. I've been working really hard, but actually I'm doing what I love. So does it class as hard work? It is work, but does it class? I don't know. Don't know if it does. It's a hard hobby. That's what it is.
You've had some iconic moments over the years, particularly with the Aguero moment. I remember that being on BBC's Match of the Day introduction right towards the end a couple of years back. Do those sort of iconic quotes come naturally, or do you prepare them?
No, you don't prepare them. No, the only things you prepare are your intro. Thanks, Gary. That's about it. And your team news, you'll jot down some skeleton notes for your team news, because you've got to get that right. That's just to get yourself going. Maybe a line at kickoff. You might have a line for kickoff, and then after that, it's what happens in front of you. You can't. I mean, the greatest commentary line of all time, bar none, is there's some people on the pitch. They think it's all over.
Yes.
Bosh. It is now. Doesn't that tell you how unscripted? He doesn't know there's going to be people on the pitch. The late great Kenneth Wolstenholme. He certainly doesn't know that Jeff Hurst's going to pick that moment to lamp the ball into the top corner. I mean, that's how everything falls together in one instant. That they think it's all over. Oh, it is now. That's just wonderful. That'll never be topped. Partly because of the goal, but the commentary itself is just perfect. Is that? That's never going to be bettered.
Well, something I was wondering is, when you was at the start of your commentary career, or even now, is there a game? Well, has there ever been a game where you've been like really, really nervous before commentating for? Yeah,
there's many. There are plenty. At Newcastle yesterday, actually, because I hadn't done a live game on the BBC for a little while. Chelsea-Liverpool FA Cup 5th round in late Feb would have been the last one, I guess. It doesn't make any difference whether I'm live or highlights, in all honesty, apart from you just have that little bit of extra edge. You've got a Coke on with you for a start, which I don't enjoy when I'm on Match of the Day on my own. So that gives it a bit of a different feel. So I haven't seen Martin for ages either. So, we've got to get to know each other again and sort of try and gel, which we did hopefully straight away. So that wasn't a problem. But there's nerves before every big game. I'll be nervous on Thursdays. City Liverpool for Match of the Day. I'll be at the Etihad on Thursday night, and I can feel it now. And I always have a thing. It happens every match, actually, where just as the handover's about to start, or just as if it's Match of the Day, the teams are about to come out the tunnel, and I'm getting ready and I'm about to go, my mouth goes dry as anything, and I suddenly find I can't swallow. And that's how my nerves manifest themselves. And I'm sort of going, and I have to swallow, otherwise I think I'm going to make a mess of this. And sometimes it gets to the stage of, I can't, and I think I'm not going to be able to speak. And that happens every game without fail. Just as the handover comes, I get a dry mouth and try and swallow, and it happens every single Match of the Day, every single commentary I do, that happens. And then once you start speaking and you get that away without coughing and spluttering, then you think, well, you don't think, you're just doing it then. It's just second nature.
In your opinion, what's the best team / Premier League team you've ever witnessed?
It was Manchester City last season. It's now Liverpool this season. Without a
Do you
doubt.
think they could carry on this form next year?
Do you think what, sorry?
Do you think they can carry on this form next year?
Maybe not to the extent that they're at, but I think they'll be the top two again, with your team not far behind. They've set markers down already. So Chelsea won't be far off. United are improving as well. I think they're a bit too far away, the United, Spurs, and definitely Arsenal's of this world, and Leicester's. But Chelsea might be pushing City and Liverpool a little bit more. City are an interesting one. Because of Silva going, because of Aguero, he'll turn 33 at some stage next season. can they push on and refine that next level? Well, the answer to that is yes, because of their coach, and he'll have planned that already. They'll know what they're doing. Can Liverpool sustain it? Yeah, I think they probably will. Maybe not to the mega level they've been at, but in terms of points gathering, but they'll still be the top two in whatever order. And Chelsea maybe not far behind. We say it every year, don't we? It's going to be an epic season. My main wish for next season, my main wish is just we can get back to not a new normal, actual normal, as soon as possible with full houses, because it's never going to be the same until we do.
I think from a Chelsea perspective, a lot of the fans, you got the likes of Timo Werner, Hakim Ziyech coming in. You talked about we'll push City and Liverpool a bit more. I'd like to agree with you, but I'm just not too sure. I think you'd give Hakim and Timo, maybe a defender, give them a season. But from my sort of perspective, I think we've overachieved slightly with our squad this year. We're in the top four. We're a point or two behind Leicester. FA Cup semi-final with our squad. We've overachieved, I think.
That's the fan in you speaking. Every fan is a pessimist, and every fan is allowed to criticise their own team, but fans of other teams are not allowed to criticise your team, and that's the way of the world, and it will always be the same. So that's purely the fan in you. From an independent outside view, I would say your young players are a year better for the experience and will be better. I don't think there's an issue there. I think they'll be Premier League stars next year. I don't think there's much of an issue. Ziyech, very good player. Maybe he'll need a year to settle. I don't think Werner will. I think Werner's that little bit more experienced. I think he's been around the block a little bit more, and we'll just have the nous. I think it'll be a Diego Costa hit the ground running effect. I think he'll be fine in the Premier League. I don't have an issue there. If you get Havertz, he's going to go somewhere. He's still raw, brilliant, but raw. He might need a little bit of time to bed in. But we overanalyze all these things. We always do. We talk about it because we love it, because we're fans of it. It's not as complicated as that. It's a question for these guys of just playing football, being coached to the best level, finding the right system that suits them, and finding form and being happy. They don't think about it anywhere near to the extent that we do. And we just talk about it and overanalyze it and think we've got theories. It's no theories. It's not science. It's sport. And it's sport stroke art, and it's a thing of beauty. I think sometimes we overdo it with the technical stuff.
With you saying United's a bit too far away from competing for the title next season, which as a United fan pains me to say, I do agree. Do you think we'll be competing for the top four more competitively than we have done so far this season?
Well, competing competitively this season now, in all honesty. But you've just reminded me in saying that. I said Leicester in the last sentence. I didn't say Wolves, and I should be doing, because they get better year on year. And as long as Nuno doesn't go anywhere, then little Portugal will be just fine. They'll be right up there. So they're an excellent team. I love watching Wolves. I think United will be. I think Ollie's really learnt quickly. Look at the run they're on now. He's actually on a longer unbeaten run now than that run that he had when he first started as caretaker, and it was carefree and wonderful. So they're going to be better again next year. I'm sure they'll make another 2 or 3 signings. They'll be up there. We don't know. Let's be honest. We don't know. Liverpool and City could implode. That's the joy about it. We don't know, and we could have a Leicester. It's only 4 years ago that happened. So that's what makes our league pretty special. It's what makes it really good to watch. But you could probably name the top 8-ish. But there's always a surprise in there somewhere.
I read your tweet a couple of days ago, and you were talking about the comparison between Liverpool's last league title compared to now. And obviously, back then they had the likes of Dalglish as a manager as well, Rush, Aldridge. I think they had John Barnes as well, Ronnie. They had such a phenomenal side back then. How would you compare the two? Which side's better in your opinion?
You can't do it. You can't compare eras. It's not possible. I saw a lot of that Liverpool team because they were the team that I used to go to Anfield a couple of times a season. A lot of my mates when I was teenagers were Liverpool fans because you had your local team and a big team, and a lot of my mates were Liverpool fans at that time. And So I used to go to Anfield. I remember I was there when they beat Nottingham Forest 5-0 in one of the classic First Division performances. Total football. I was on the cop that day, actually. I was a neutral. I was with a couple of mates who were Liverpool fans, but wow, what a performance that was. And I wanted to be there just to go there once. So you'd been there 2 or 3 times, I think, overall. That was a great team. This is a great team. I don't think you can compare eras. I've never done it because I personally feel football just gets better all the time. The diets, the fitness, the technical abilities, everything is better than it was. And I think you can do that with any sport. You can look at golf, you can look at tennis, you can look at cricket. We all have our own favourites. It's usually from the era when we grew up, because they're our formative years and they're implanted on your brain and you think that's the best it's ever going to be. But it's probably the best your life's ever going to be. So that's why when you're in your sort of late teens, early 20s, that's when everything gets imprinted on your brain. So I don't really go in for this comparing eras. I just enjoy it for what it is at the time, because we'll never know. It's a pointless. I know it's a fun thing to do, but it's a pointless exercise, really. Anyway, it's like the argument with different Pele, George Best, Maradona, onto Messi, Ronaldo. Who's better? Well, I'll tell you what, they were just all great. It's as simple as that. Would George Best have been better on the pitches of today than the mud baths that he played on? Yeah, undoubtedly. But the players of today are better now anyway, because they're stronger and faster, etc. And so you can't. I could say the same about commentary as well. The greats of the past will always be the greats of the past in your ears, because that's what you grew up with. But I'd like to think that we do it a little bit differently now, because everything evolves. Some people will say it's worse. Technically, I really don't think it is, because I've watched a lot of old stuff. Doing the rewind programs, I go through a lot of old stuff and think, you know what, I think we do all right these days. We couldn't do it in the old style. It would sound wrong these days. So everything changes, everything evolves. And I think, personally, in all sport, be it the broadcasting of it, the commentary of it, the playing of it, the watching, everything gets better. Everything's an improvement to what it was before. Otherwise, they would die a death.
Well, something I've always wanted to ask a commentator or someone that attends games regularly, out of all the English stadiums that you've been to, which stadium, in your opinion, would you say has the best atmosphere among the fans?
Oh, best atmosphere. That depends on the game. That wholly depends on the game. The best stadium, I thought you were going to ask me the best stadium, which is undoubtedly Tottenham now. It is a fabulous place. They have thought of everything. It's a wonderful ground to go to. I genuinely get excited when I see my name on the list to go to Tottenham now. Just going there again. Brilliant. The food's incredible. The view's incredible. The walk to the stadium's incredible. It's a wonderful experience. So that's my favourite ground. Atmosphere entirely depends on the game. It really does. People say there's no atmosphere at Manchester City. Well, I've been there when it's been the roof lifted off. And actually, you saw an example at Newcastle yesterday of why sometimes there isn't an atmosphere at City. Because when they've got 85% possession and they're outpassing the opposition by 10 times, there is an element of, let's just sit back and enjoy this. Don't have to get behind them because it's just happening. It's like being at the theatre. The show's unfolding. You don't need to play your part. And I think that's why sometimes it's almost on the verge of being boring because it's so one-sided. It might, don't think it will, but it might start to happen at Liverpool like that. But Liverpool on a European night is always special. That's got an amazing atmosphere. One that always stands out to me, actually, European nights seem to have something a little bit better. I think any match under lights just carries a little bit more excitement anyway. I look back at my own time at this place at York and the under lights thing is I'll really miss this place when it finishes at the end of this year at some point, because the games under lights are just something extra special, even though our floodlights have never properly lit the pitch. It's been a bit dingy, but it's always been a great occasion. And I remember a night at Celtic Park I can't remember the date. It would have been in the early 2000s, and I was working for ITV doing the Champions League, and Celtic v Juventus at Celtic Park, 4-3. Lubomir Moravcik had the game of his life, and the noise when Celtic got the fourth goal, it's the only time it's happened to me in any stadium. I tend to have the crowd effects turn up quite loud, because then you've got something to fight against. So I do it even actually with the fake noise that we have at the moment. Turn it up a little bit, because it just makes you fight against and project your voice a little bit more, give it a sense of importance. Celtic Juventus didn't need to do that, but I had them cranked up reasonably loud anyway. And when that fourth goal went in, I commentated on it and I had to brush my headphones off because they cracked. The noise popped them. There there was this crowd noise, and then suddenly it went from a loud cheer to just white noise in my ear, and then a sort of loud whistling, and basically they'd broken. It's like blowing a speaker, and I just brushed them off and I just had to do it without for a moment or two, because the noise, it's never happened to me before or since, but the noise was incredible. So yeah, Celtic Park on those nights, and a few nights at Rangers. I've got to balance it out, and I covered Celtic and Rangers quite a lot in those days for ITV, and yeah, the noise at those two places on the big European nights were just. Remember that Rangers team? I used to really enjoy watching them with Stefan Klos in goal, Michael Maltz, the Dutchman up front, Laudrup. Can't remember which one was it. Brian? It was Brian.
Brian, yeah.
Jorg Alberts, the hammer, used to hit everything from 25 yards and take the net off. And yeah, Dick Advocaat was the manager. I remember they were really good occasions.
I know. I was going to say I've got family up in Glasgow, and they also remember fondly they were there at the game against Barcelona when Tony Watt scored to make it. Was it 2-0? And then Messi got one late back. And obviously on that night, you cannot beat an atmosphere at Celtic Park in Europe. But like you said, there's always that a bit of excitement, like you said, under the lights, because there's just a bit of buzz around the atmosphere. You got your pre-match pints, and going into the game, you just got that more buzz because it's under the lights.
There's a bit for everybody, because when you're older, you've been at work. When you're sort of late teens, early 20s, you say you have a few beers beforehand as well. But when you're a kid as well, it's that staying out late. I get to stay out late tonight. It's dark. The floodlights are on. The whole going there, going home, the whole thing. And it stays in your mind. It stays in your head, that. And let's face it, when you're sort of 8, 9, 10, as I used to be when I used to get to go to York City games under lights on like a Tuesday night, that was my one night a week when I was allowed to stay up late because we're off to the match. So again, that's something that gets imprinted on your brain, and it becomes exciting. So you can never beat a night game.
Besides your footballing commentary, do you do a bit of charity work? I believe you're an ambassador for Foundation of Light. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I worked at Sunderland for 5 years with Sun FM and then Metro Radio, and I've got a real deep love for Sunderland Football Club. They played a massive part in my career. There's big links with York City anyway. It goes back to Dennis Smith, Viv Busby, John McPhail, Marco Gabbiadini. So there's always been a nice time between the two clubs, and I was covering York, and then the radio station I was working for bought another one in the northeast, so I got to cover Sunderland. That's where my career sort of really took off. So for 5 years I went to every single game, home and away, commentating on them, and that's where I sort of learnt the trade, if you like, whilst watching brilliant football under Peter Reid's team. So I got a lot of friends there, a lot of connections, and they asked me to be an ambassador for their charity, the Foundation of Light, which does wonderful work for people in need in the northeast. It really does. The Beacon of Light, which has been built next to the football ground, is a fantastic facility. And it breaks my heart to see them where they are now. It's just a travesty. It is a Premier League club, not just a Premier League club. It's a Premier League club that should be winning stuff. I get a little bit annoyed when people always just refer to Newcastle when they talk about the northeast. There are two up there. I'm just going to apologise to Middlesbrough, because they're more. I view them as North Yorkshire. They're not quite up there, and they're not seen as rivals by those two. But those two, we've been saying this for 40 years, but somebody one day, it nearly happened with Newcastle. It nearly happened with Sunderland under Peter Reid, Kevin Keegan. Somebody one day will get a hold of those two, one of those two, if not both, and they will be two of the biggest clubs in the country. They really, it's all there. Everything is there, just waiting to take off. But we've been saying this for decades, but it will happen one day. But I'll continue to fly the flag for Sunderland as long as I live. And the other charity, actually, I'm a patron of is the Sporting Memories Foundation, which I got involved in again. Tony Jameson Allen, who's the man behind it, he introduced me to it, and I just very quickly fell in love with it because of what they do. Because what they do is very closely linked to what I do. They use sport to trigger memories, and that's all I do all the time. I'm looking back at things and prepping for things by looking back at things, and memories come flooding out. And basically people who are isolated, lonely, especially relevant at these times, depressed, people with dementia, people with Alzheimer's. They run clubs throughout the country. There's a load now. There are hundreds and hundreds throughout the country now. There will be one near you, where you go to coffee mornings, young and old. Anybody can go. They get special guests occasionally. I've spoken at a few. Many people have spoken. There are cards with images of ex-sport stars, or just moments, or just could be anything. There's just so many. There's thousands and thousands of images, and people start a conversation. Do you remember him? And it just sparks. And when you go on their website, there's a lovely story about a guy who was in a care home up in Scotland, and he kind of was forgotten about. He had no visitors, and then one day somebody struck up a conversation with him, and he didn't really say much. And it turned out he'd played for Scotland. He'd played in the same Scotland team as Bill Shankly and Matt Busby. And he played for Hearts, and he just kind of this old guy on his own. And then by talking about it and his memories coming out, it incredibly came out of himself. He was out of his shell. He was living again, and that's what sport can do. It can almost literally bring people back to life. And that was a wonderful story, and that's why he told me that and played me the video, and that really got me involved in it. And yeah, they do fantastic work. I should do more for them. I should run and stuff, but I'm not a runner. I think I do other stuff. I keep flying the flag for them, and I will do other stuff. But I just, yeah, when I see people running marathons, I think I should do that. I'm a patron of a charity. I should really do that. And then think of the training and think, no, it's not me. I'm afraid.
You're a bit five-a-side.
No, those days have gone. The knees have gone. I could maybe do one of those days where you play 4 rounds of golf in a day. I'd maybe do that. I'd maybe do that or something. It's not very impressive, that really, but no, I gave up five-a-side a few years ago. I'm always one conversation away from a comeback, but managed to resist so far. I'm 48 now. I'm virtually qualifying for the walking football, and I can't do that.
Something I wanted to ask is, out of all the people you've met through commentating, who has been your favourite person that you've met through doing what you do?
Can't say. There are hundreds. I'm lucky enough to work with so many people who are co-commentators. You know, and yeah, only yesterday. If you compare, you know, if you say this example, this is going to sound like a clang and a name drop, but I do work with these guys, so I'm not doing that for that. But you know, yesterday, just chewing the fat. It's a regular day at work, and I'm with Gary Lineker, Alan Shearer, Micah Richards, Martin Keown, and we're just chatting away. You know, and these are guys that, you know, Gary Lineker, I used to have books and posters, and you know, I've worked with Clive Allen. Clive Allen was one of my heroes as a kid. Worked with Clive. Chris Waddle was one of my ultimate heroes as a kid, and I class him as a friend. You know, I love having beers with Chris. It's the best thing in the world. So people like that, that's the thing. That's the moment you pinch yourself. I remember the first time I worked at commentary with Trevor Francis, which is only a few years ago, and I was so excited. I was genuinely so excited. The first £1 million footballer, again, posters up on your wall as a kid. So it's funny, actually. You look back, I go to my mum's house occasionally, look back through her old bookcase and find the old shoot annuals from the early 80s. And all these people that I hero worshipped, and I think, I know them now. This is weird. So that's kind of nice. You don't think about it all the time. When you ask a question like that, it's quite nice to, it comes flooding back. It's, yeah, that's not, I can't say any one person. My favourite right now is Martin Keown, because I saw him yesterday, and Martin's great, and I love winding Martin up, because he's the hardest man in the world, but I know I can wind him up.
Especially about Arsenal.
He's brilliant, and he adores Arsenal. He gets quite cross predicament that they're in at the moment. They could do with him, couldn't they? Oh, that'd be great. I reckon he could do a job, actually, still.
He'd still do a job at the back, I reckon, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going into my final year at university. I'm 20 now, and my ambition is to become a sports journalist. What would your advice be to those wanting to succeed in the commentary/sports media industry?
Nothing specific to the actual role, because I do believe it's a natural thing. It's got to be natural. It's got to be you. I don't think you can learn it to a large extent. It's all got to come from you. And so for that reason, the two bits of advice I would say is just stay enthusiastic, love your sport, whatever sport it is that you specialise in, and please keep it as broad as possible. Enjoy everything. I used to be a real sport billy as a kid. I worshipped loads of sports and followed them all. It's obviously narrowed down as you get older. You don't really have time to indulge in the others quite so much. So I'm now football, cricket and golf, and that's kind of it. But football's always been my main passion and love. And that's it. Love it. Make sure it's a passion. Do it as a hobby. That's how I started. And that is essentially how I'm doing it now. It is still my hobby. I'm just very lucky to have had the right breaks and make a living out of it. But always see it as a hobby. I mean, for the first 2 years of my life doing this, I had a regular job, so to speak. I worked Monday to Friday in offices, and on a Saturday I would go and work for peanuts, for petrol money, for the Club Call network, which was before the internet, the premium rate phone lines, and for local radio stations. You know, you get bunged 10, 20 quid here and there to go and do a game at Hull City or Leeds United or whatever. And through that, I was lucky enough to meet people and get breaks. But if I'd still been doing that now, I would still be doing it. I never actually thought of it in a way as a full-time career. It just happened like that. I think you can force it too much sometimes. So you've just got to be natural and think, I love doing that, so I'm going to carry on doing it. And if you are good at it and your passion shines through, then you will hopefully, not everybody will, not everybody's lucky enough, but you will get the breaks. And to that end, I would also say the other bit of advice is never say no. If you're offered the chance to cover a game and you want to do it, even if you've got something else on, even if you've got a week in Spain booked with your mates, you cancel that and you do it. You do the game. And that stems from the first game I ever went to as a reporter. I was shadowing a chap called John Temple from the Club Call network, who I'd written to a few weeks, maybe even months previously, not had a reply. This was before email. I didn't have the email address for him. I'd written him a letter. And well, I hadn't. I'd just written it to Club Call. He was the coordinator, and he got back to me. And I got a phone call on a Friday night at home, and he said, "I would like you to come if you're interested in and shadow me at York against Brentford tomorrow." This was early season 93-94, so October 93 this was. And I initially said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I can't. I'm going to a match tomorrow." And I was. I had tickets with friends. It was one of those occasions, actually. It was Main Road. It was Man City v Liverpool, and I was going with, I think, 3 other friends. We got tickets to go and watch it. So, a big game like that, yeah, I'll go. Rather than watch York for once, I'll go and watch that. So I was going to that game. So I put the phone down thinking, oh, never mind, I'll get another chance. And it was actually my dad, who passed away many years ago. It was my dad who actually said, get back on the phone, ring him back and say you'll go. And I didn't have his number. Didn't have 1471 then. Couldn't call back. Had to go through the phone book. Thankfully, he was in it. And I rung him back and said, I'm really sorry, I'm misunderstanding there. And I don't have to go to that. I will come to York tomorrow. And I went. And the following week, I was on my own doing it. Having shadowed him 1 week, he said, right, you can do it next week. And I went to the next game and I did it on my own. And that was the starting point. And if I'd said no to that then, somebody else would have said yes. Mm-hmm. And if they were any good, any door might have been closed to me forever. Because I might have been doing that for another 2-3 years and never got a break and packed it all in. So never say no. And even now, when I'm offered games and I work for various networks throughout the course of a season, even now, if I can do it, if it doesn't clash with something else, I'll do it. Because I love watching football. So I will always try and do it. And it's the same reason that hunger never leaves you. It's a little bit selfish, I suppose. But if you say no, somebody else will say yes. You might not get that chance again. So if it is your passion, make sure you take it every opportunity.
Well, I think we have covered quite a bit tonight. Have you got anything to add to that, James?
Well, no, as a student, I'd like to thank you for coming on. I'm such a big fan of yours. I've followed your career for a while, and I'll take that advice, and hopefully my ambitions to become a sports journalist hopefully come true, and I'll look back on this call and with great memories, and I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight. No
problem, guys. Real pleasure talking to you, and just keep enjoying it. Really keep enjoying it, and all the best to United and Chelsea for next season, and to everybody else as well, because I've got to say that, because you've got to be neutral.
Best luck to York as well.
Cheers. Apart from Scarborough. Cheers. I hope they fail. Hate Scarborough.
As always, everyone, check out the page we've got on Facebook. I'll add the link to that in the description, and all of our Twitters will be in the description. So, again, cheers for joining us, guys. Can't thank you enough, mate.
No problem. Thanks a lot for having me. Cheers, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Take care, mate. Look after yourself.
Cheers. All the best.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.